to start first by thanking the organizing committee for inviting me to India. This is my first visit in India. Yesterday I came on Friday night. I enjoyed my first day here. It's a very interesting country. I tried to find some commonalities between Israel and India, but I did not find really many, except one that I remember from my childhood, is that India and Israel got their independence almost at the same time from Britain. So I do remember India from my childhood, but now I managed to come here. So thank you very much for inviting me. My talk will be rather general about the title. I did not choose a very long title for my presentation, but I do want to give an optimistic view of what the future of the regulation will be. And I will start by our ministry's view of the purpose of the regulation, why we do this regulation. And I think it's a good perhaps a good timing to stop for a minute and think why we are doing the regulation. This will also allow us to concentrate on the right things. The first, the way we see it, the Ministry of Energy, the purpose is to manage the supply and of the natural resources of the country for the benefit of the citizens. This has to happen both, always, I mean, both today and in the future, both in a regular day and in a crisis day. So this is very important, and I will say a few words about the implications with respect to renewable energy. You see the little graph, the green graph, renewable energy has some implications on, I think, 3 of these bullets with respect to the purpose of the regulation. The third point is we need to balance the consumers with the manufacturers, basically. And we run everything under very difficult constraints, which are both economic, environmental, and social. I will say a few words about the renewable energy, why I pointed to the 3 sources. Well, supply and management of the natural resources. What I meant basically is that the fossil fuels will eventually disappear. So if we want to think about the future, we need to manage the way we use them and perhaps find ways, other ways, that will not dwindle with time. Of course, this also refers to the second point, but the second point also has an emergency point for the renewable energy. In Israel, we see this as also a possibility to balance. I will mention it also on the next slide. The economic constraints, of course, is the price. Everyone is talking here about the price, but the main driver for renewable energy, of course, is the environment. I want to point out a social point for the renewable energy, which perhaps is also important for India, because in the fossil fuels world, we had a very strong concentration of the manufacturing. And with renewable energy, all of a sudden, everyone can play the game of manufacturing. I will point out the priorities, the way we see it for the regulation in terms of the introduction of renewable energy. First and foremost is the energy security. What I mean by this is the availability of energy at all time. For example, if one source, in Israel we have gas and coal as the main electricity production sources. If we have in the gas section a technical problem in the supply of the gas, we want to be always sure that we can obtain electricity from other sources. So we need to vary our sources, and we see the renewable energy as such a source. The second point here is, in many countries actually, they want to manufacture their energy and rely only on themselves. So they do not want to rely on other nations. This is very strong for example, in Europe, where they get their gas from Russia and are very worried about it. And so this was one of the strong drivers to get renewable energy. So this is another aspect of security that, so this and the reason why we put it as our top priority. The second point, of course, is the environment, the CO2, and our changing climate. I want to emphasize that even if we're not sure exactly what the implication of the higher CO2 in the air or the implications are, we should not take the risk of this world changing. We don't know, if we don't know the implication, we should not take the risk. And CO2 today is almost twice in the atmosphere, almost twice what it was over hundreds of thousands of years. So we really need to do something about this. Third is price stability. What do I mean by price stability? Actually, this also has two aspects. One is when you buy renewable energy, you know the price for 20 or 30 years. It's not going to change because essentially almost all the investment is put up front. You know how much you're going to put, you know how much you're going to pay for the electricity over 20 or 25 years. This is not the case, of course, with the fossil fuels, where the price volatilities that we've seen in the last 8 years, or let's say 10 years, has been tremendous, going from about $20 a barrel of oil in the beginning of the 2000s to 120, 140, and today back to around 40. This volatility is not very good for the economy. But also in the long term, or the long-term prices for the fossil fuels, of course, with the dwindling supply, may go up quite considerably, and we don't want this to happen. So what can regulation do in order to do that? And so again, I want to emphasize the point that when we want to introduce renewable energy into our electricity production system, there is a purpose in this. We want to do it because of these reasons. And of course, this may cost money, this may change the rules a little bit, but we want to do something for a purpose. What are the tools that we have? Of course, the first one is setting up the rules. The governments set up the rules. It can be very simple. For example, I want the producer, the frequency of the electricity to be 50 hertz, plus minus a certain percentage. So this sets up the rule, and then everybody has to comply. We can set up the rules that we would only allow a certain amount of pollutant in the production of electricity, or any sort of things like that. This is considered common and well understood everywhere. The next level of involvement could be direct and indirect support. We have seen that in the renewable energy quite a bit. This can be subsidy to renewable energy, or at the other side could be a carbon tax to make carbon emissions more costly. It could be loan guarantees, for example. Could be a loans fund. What the loans fund, I mean that the government would put a certain amount of money, and the private sector would put some more money, and this money would be available at reduced interest rates to set up a big project. And we could do various games of taxes, for example, accelerated depreciation. The next level of involvement, which is also possible and was done in Israel as well, is direct or indirect involvement. What do I mean by this? Direct involvement means, for example, that the government can decide to build an infrastructure for a certain industry. For example, in Israel we had a very significant gas discovery in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And the Israeli government decided essentially to build the transmission lines for the gas. It was done through BOT, but it doesn't matter. It was a decision of the government to build this infrastructure to allow the country to use the gas that was found. Okay, this is a direct involvement in a market. Another example of an involvement in Israel, the land is very scarce, and it's very difficult to find the land or acquire the land for use with renewable energy, which you may well be aware that consumes a lot of land, especially solar. So the government, for example, could do part of the work for the entrepreneurs and prepare certain areas of land for use as renewable energy. This is another example of direct involvement that could be done. 1 minute. Run very quickly. I do want to say, I will go very quickly, the regulation, of course, has a target, as I said, has sometimes what we do is successful, sometimes what we do is less successful. So there are examples of disasters that happened through a very strong regulatory involvement. I gave some examples here. The US government supported Solyndra as a PV manufacturers in hundreds of millions of dollars. Feed-in tariffs were very high in some countries. Now we just heard about Britain, and that caused excessive costs. For example, on the rules side of things, the California electricity crisis was caused by regulation. I put a question mark on Germany because this is a little bit debatable. But I want to say on the optimistic side that generally the regulation gets what it wants, and eventually the market evolves to the target. And we all see the electricity market in most of the Western world work quite well. And I will mention two aspects. One is the renewable energy revolution. We have already in the Western world a very strong penetration of the renewable energy within something like 10 years. So this is very quickly, I think. And also the electricity market unbundling that happened also around the last 20 years, and this happened through the regulation because the governments decided to do it. I will not go into that. I do want to show a little bit of the success story in Israel of the loan guarantee program in the energy efficiency market. We had a program whereby we would subsidize about 20% of an energy efficiency project. And according to this, we managed to save electricity use at a cost which is far less than the production of electricity. And the cost of the return on investment for these projects is generally around 4 years. And they should have happened on their own, but they did not happen on their own. There are many reasons to that. I will not go into this, but I would, on these sectors, you can see that the cost of reducing the electricity consumption on the first row is 4 cents per kilowatt hour. On the others, it's not electricity, it's a ton of CO2, and also the reduction in terms of cost was, I think, at a reasonable price. So I think regulation generally, after some time, achieves its goals. There are mistakes, of course, but I think the successes prevail, and we try to do our best, of course. We try also to learn from others as much as we can. Thank you very much.